Hello. Is everybody there?
I hear you. And
Dušan, can you hear me?
Okay. There were three of us, I see. So first of
Good
all,
morning.
good morning. Good morning to you on this dummy and gray autumn day with fog and quite low temperature. But this is why we are here, to bring some additional light to what we need to discuss today. Today is the final day of this Reset Summit that has been organized by Adria Media Group, and I'm happy and grateful that we have the opportunity to give a final touch to this 11 days long exercise with numerous participants and substantial reach to public. There has been a number of very interesting and discussions with almost unanimous the conclusion that there is a need for a new model, whether reset or a new setup. This is yet to be explored. But going back to the previous model perhaps is not possible and should not provide sustainability. We today probably would give some kind of more strategic approach to the issues that are all very well known, but giving another view or perception probably might help. What is the way of Serbia to this uncertain future, particularly taking into account global economic crisis, climate changes, COVID, emerging social inequalities, discrepancies? Which are possible paths, and can we use this global challenge as a push for a better? They are the questions we shall try to give some answers to, and hint probably some solutions, for which I have the pleasure to introduce to you today my today panelists, Madame Francoise Jacob, UN Coordinator in Serbia, and Antoine Avignon from the European Commission Delegation in Serbia, who is dealing particularly with environmental issues. Well, you see that the official language of this panel is in English. Probably it would be might be if it's in French, but unfortunately I don't speak French, and most of the public probably not. And so we will keep in stuck to this what most of the people can understand. Now, I would like to ask Ms. Jacob that, okay, we all know what, or should know at least, what UNDP is and what it's doing, but it might be good to reiterate what is the role of UNDP in implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, and what are those goals represent, in fact? What is Sustainable Agenda aiming at, and do people really understand for what the agenda stands for? What is needed to make public to embrace goals as an integral part of their set of mind?
Great. Well, thank you very much. I trust you hear me well.
Yeah, too well.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me today. And you know, I'm honored to be talking at the end of a session or a week where I'm sure you have already come up with a lot of solutions. So I will just try and give my own perspective, or let's say the perspective of the United Nations. What I would like to start with is just maybe to mention again the basic definition of sustainable development. It's meeting the needs of the current generation without limiting the ability of future generation to fulfill their needs. And the reason why I like to repeat this over and over again is because it brings this whole term of sustainability, sustainable development back to the people. And sustainable development is about the people. So it means really we are looking at ways to build a better world for humanity. And we don't take more resources from the planet that can be regenerated, and we do not produce more waste, more pollution than can be reabsorbed. And again, I also like at the start to give a number. Right now, as humanity, we are behaving as if we had 1.75 Earth, but we know we only have one Earth. We may have Mars one of these days, but not soon. So the second number I like to also mention is the fact that while we increase the global wealth of the world, we have seen over the past few years, and especially now with COVID, that the inequalities are also increasing. So in 1980, I think the top 1% of the global population was getting 16% of the total world income. Now they are getting 20%. That was in 2018. They're getting 20% of the total income. And the bottom 50% of humanity is getting only 10%. So we still have a lot of work to do. And this is basically the objective of the Global Agenda 2030 and of the Sustainable Development Goals. Just a very brief, because you asked me, what is again the agenda about? The Agenda 2030 didn't come just like this, right? There was it's the process that came after a 25-year of global agenda, and in 2015 there was again this reflection on after the success of the Millennium Development Goals, which were really an accelerator in terms of reducing poverty, reducing hunger. Improving the education, access to education and access to health. After this, the world generally said, okay, where do we go next? And in Serbia, 23,000 people were actually provided some suggestion, which fed into millions of suggestions. So Agenda 2030 was the result of a global consultation, which is fantastic when you think about it. It's not a bureaucratic process from the UN, it's the result of a global consultation, which means that Agenda 2030 and the goals are very much anchored in the day-to-day life of the people. Now, what is the UN doing? And I'm going to talk about the United Nations rather than just UNDP. UNDP is the development agency for the United Nations, but we have a lot of other agencies that are involved. Most recently, everybody has heard very much about the World Health Organization, WHO. They lead all the work on the health, which is very prominent right now. So the UN system supports member states in their implementation of the goals. We raise awareness, we help formulate policies, strategies, solutions. We support countries to report on progress, and we make sure, most importantly, that no one is left behind. So within the agenda, the UN really looks at reaching out to the more vulnerable, the marginalized group, and find solutions, sustainable solutions for them too. And that includes, of course, in Serbia. But we also have the ambition as the UN to reach out to all the stakeholders. And that includes the private sector, the financing institutions, the municipality, and the people. Now I'll move to the last part of your question, is what's the mindset in Serbia? And it's interesting. We did a survey this year with Ipsos in Serbia. And we were asking questions, again, related to the future we want. And we asked questions on sustainability, sustainable development. And basically 10% of people in Serbia know about the SDGs. Only 10% feel that they know and they understand what the SDGs are. 60% have never heard about them. And in between, you have different level of awareness. And that reflects another survey which was done last year on sustainable development. So I think this was a very strong message for us, is that people around us are not necessarily aware of what the SDGs are, and they're definitely not aware of how they can contribute. And this is, for us, it means that we really need to reach out to everybody. Because if we want the Agenda 2030 to become a reality, then really there has to be a pull and push sort of mechanisms where, of course, the government can lead the way with, a vision and etc. But we also need to have the involvement of all the citizens in shaping this future and in finding solutions also within the communities, within the families, and also for each individual. So I'll stop here because I'm sure Antoine will have a lot to say on that too.
Thank you, Francoise. Well, it goes very well what would like to ask Antoine. In fact, the European Commission, of course, is European Union, in fact, is doing in line with all of those global goals. And one of the tools or frameworks which has been delivered last year, it's a big one, it's a green, so-called Green Deal, which somehow integrates some of the sustainable goals also in its agenda. So this is a master plan or master framework for the future. This is the result of overall awareness on human impact on environment and in life in general. But can we really comprehend the magnitude of these strategic requirements? I mean, taking into account sustainable goals and this agenda, this Green Deal. Like any strategic planning, we should know where we are, but more important is why we are there. I mean, why we are here, in fact, and of course, where we want to be. Moreover, we should be fully aware whether we can make it and why we should do it. To be, and how outstanding efforts is reflecting, these are outstanding reflecting on Serbia, which is at least publicly and very vocally striving towards EU membership. Now, which is the relation and of course relation to the UN goals.
Well, thank you very much, and for the question and for the invitation. And I'm happy to be here with you today. It's a good moment to talk about environment and development. We have in Serbia, particularly, a new government, which is also a continuity, but there's a new energy, and we want to see this, of course, translated into practical reforms and substantial improvement of condition of life of our fellow citizens of Serbia. For your question, I mean, you know, Francoise Jacob already very well described the overall arcing goal of the SDGs. It's meant for people. It's not meant for being a paper strategy. It reflects on the needs of the people, of the citizen. It draws on the actual difficulties on the social, on gender inequalities, on the which are exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, also by the inequalities towards climate change or energy poverty. So, in the same vein, so to speak, the Green Deal is a policy that doesn't come from yesterday. It comes from a long history of environmental protection awareness in Europe, but not only, also in the US, also in other places in the world, and it comes as a policy to guide for a sustainable planet. As Francoise rightly said, we borrow the planet to the next generation, and this is a guiding principle for us. We cannot just continue to do business as usual, because there's no planet B, and it's very theoretical for many people, and some are still in denial. But I think the majority the worldwide can see that it is global warming or climate change is happening, and how it affects people. People are leaving countries. Economies are going down because of the negative impact of climate change. So this is real. We are still in Serbia or in Europe quite protected because of our geographic position, but make no mistake, there are dreadful events happening. We had floods in Serbia years ago. We had terrible floods in the south of France a few weeks ago. So it's happening, and we need to have the ambition of our policies at the right level. So the Green Deal is there. It's one tool. It's one policy. The most important is to implement it, is to have the right amount of people, staff, expertise, funds, budget to implement these ideas. Where we are in Serbia, to relate to your question, I think there is a very good image of where we are in Serbia, in globally, not only for environment, but where we are, or there are many reports. You have Serbia has many friends who are bringing reports on the impact of COVID, on the economy, on the macroeconomy, on gender inequalities, on energy poverty. We have reports on air pollution, very accurate. So we have, I would say, a very good picture of where we are now and where we want to go. I think the government set 5 principles for the next month or years. Maybe environment is there across in an horizontal way across these 5 objectives, priorities. I think the Serbian citizens are maybe not aware of what are the SDGs, maybe 10-20%, Ms. Jacob said, but they know what it means. They know what it means to have a job, access to health, access to school, and to have a possibility to move or to find a good job, or to breathe clean air and have a good access to safe water. So now this has to be these visions of Green Deal and of the government in Serbia have to be translated into action plans, into activities, and we will probably discuss this this morning. I think that there is a good momentum despite the difficulties of COVID to grasp the green, what we call the green recovery, and to not go into the type of business we were doing before, but to build back better, or even we say to build forward better in a way that is more sustainable and more respectful to human life and all kind of life on the planet. And I leave the floor to you for the next questions.
Okay, thank you for this. Now it's obvious from both of your answers that there is a kind of platform, there is a plan, there is an agenda, there is some goals, but they need to be implemented one way or another. Despite that there is a limited number of people that understand it, the basic job and the basic burden is on governments. Well, the governments are main stakeholders in this transition process, and although not the only one, of course not. What is needed to obtain effective sustainable development policy making and efficient policy implementation? Would institutional solution, like, for example, setting up the separate Ministry for Sustainable Development, help? I mean, this has been done in several countries in the region, but even in the wider environment, for example, in Montenegro, Malta, even in France. I mean, at least it's in the name of the ministry. In Croatia recently. Do you know what are their experiences and achievements because they set up such kind of institution? Was it helpful? In Serbia, on the other hand, okay, we know that we now have the new government, but then again, this government has the Ministry for Environment, of course, but the whole government is a limited duration until beginning of 2022. And with unlimited burden of unresolved and burning environmental issues, how this shall affect efforts for gaining sustainable future?
Great. Thank you, Dušan, again for this important and complicated double question. Let me just talk first about the preconditions that are necessary for a good institutional setup, or before even you put a good institutional setup. Number one, as I said before, we need to have an awareness and understanding across the society, across the political and economic leaders, on the concept of sustainability, on the values that it entails, the benefits that it brings, the costs that are associated, of course, and the risk that it entails. If we don't move fast enough, of course. So it's important, all this awareness is actually very important to create and sustain meaningful change. From there, we need to have a political vision. Right? It's very clear. The leadership at all levels, the leadership need to have the vision. But to support that, we also need to have a political will. So we have some countries that have developed a nice vision, but then it's missing the will to operate that vision. And then we need to shape the solutions. We need to ensure that there is the technical and operational know-how within the key institutions, whether it's at national or local level. The capacities, we need to have the capacities, and we need to have the resources. And of course, we need a very well coordinated action. And I'll talk about this a bit later. Importantly also, we need to have data. We need to have policies and decisions that are based on data, cost-benefit analysis, etc. So the institutional mechanisms are important, and they need to be well adapted and adjusted to each country. There is not one size fit for all. And you mentioned France. I will only talk about France because I'm not too aware of what's happening in Montenegro, for example, on this particular ministry. But in France, there is a ministry that's called Ministry for Ecological Transition. Now, it's not just about sustainable development, and in a way, it's a mega ministry. It includes energy and energy transition. It includes sustainable development. It includes management of natural risk. It includes industrial security. It includes transport and transport infrastructure, ocean, etc. So it's a very wide ministry under which really the government can set a number of integrated policies. And here in Serbia, you don't have that. You have a relatively modest, I would say, Ministry of Environment that's dealing with biodiversity and that's dealing with water and waste. And then you have a separate Ministry of Energy, Infrastructure, etc. So I don't think the solution is necessarily a Ministry for Sustainable Development, because we want all ministries to integrate sustainable development in their way of planning, designing, prioritizing, etc. And I think this is where the challenge is. And plus, beyond the institutions, we really need a number of commitment and mechanisms to keep the country really on track and the country development anchored in sustainability. Now, for example, if you look at Europe, in the European treaties, sustainable development is really a fundamental element and aspiration of the treaties, both for the EU itself internally, but also in the EU role in promoting sustainable development outside its borders. That's very important. In some countries, sustainable development is enshrined in the constitution. That's a major element. In Serbia, it's not the case. I would like to say it's not yet the case. But sustainable development start to be in some of the planning document. So I also mentioned the important dimension of coordination. Serbia has actually established an inter-ministerial working group on the implementation of Agenda 2030. So that's pretty good. This includes 26 line ministries, and they meet regularly to exchange, progress, to share best practices, etc. The good news is the chair of this working group is now directly reporting to the Prime Minister. And for me, this is with the new cabinet, and for me, it was really a small sign that this government is really gonna try and work on this sustainable development in different ways. So that coordination is important. Of course, it is supported also by some work done with the parliament. There is a unit or a team working on sustainable development. And then the country reports regularly. And I think this is where we also, again, as the UN, we can support to make sure that the report is meaningful, to make sure that the report reflects real changes on the ground. So we do a lot of work with the Statistic Office, for example, to see how each of the ministries should have their own data that demonstrate how they address sustainability in their budgeting, in their planning, and in their implementation. And so now the challenge, and you, this is the last part of your question. The challenge is that the new cabinet has 18 months. And for sure, they're going to focus on very short-term action. So it's our duty as the UN and as the EU, other organization, it will really be our duty to advocate day after day for planting the seeds for long-term actions for sustainability. So air pollution is a good example. Putting filters is important, right? But and you can do this within the next 2 years probably on some of the major the major installations. But planning for the energy transition, which is a 30-year effort, planning for the energy transition is equally important. I should say is more important. So this is really going to be our job, and hopefully we can combine our our expertise and our dynamic, I would say, with the other institutions, so that we make sure that we have that in the background, we have that long-term thread that is really starting to become more and more important, so that in 5 years we can show some progress and we have a bit of a horizon in terms of when the country will be fully operated on sustainable parameters.
Thank you, Francoise, for this. You really pinpointed few of many very important issues, like strategic planning, as you basically said on the very end, is important in preconditions of all and everything. If you want to achieve some kind of sustainability, you need to know really what you want to do and, of course, how you can do this. But then you planted one interesting idea. I mean, maybe you can get it here. I mean, having this mega ministry. So basically, you have whole government in one ministry. You just need the foreign affairs, I don't know, defense or something like that. Maybe they can take it here as an example. Nevertheless, Antoine, in EU was taking into account what Francoise also said, but in your report on Serbia progress for 2020 results of evaluation hasn't been very brilliant. More on the contrary, Serbia made limited progress in the past year. It said they are mainly on strategic planning. In 2019, the recommendations remain valid, I mean, from 2019. And the main problems remain in administrative and financial capacity, with no institution for managing environment and investment, landfills and waste management in general, and fight against climate changes. In other words, Serbia is substantially lagging behind EU trends, neighbors even, and above all, its own set, adopted, and sworn goals and agendas. Why is that so? I mean, are there people lacking information or education or dedication to goals or will institutions, or they are just apathetic and do not care about anything beyond their own doorstep? I mean, would setting up a separate ministry, I ask Francoise as well, for sustainable development, as there are some ideas, I mean, like in some countries in the region, could solve the problem?
Well, to solve the problem, you have to identify the problem, and you, in your question, there's part of an answer already. The fact is, there is no one size fits all. You know, in policies. For Serbia, there is for sure, and the EU report, the latest one, says it clearly. There are a lot of areas to be improved. It's historically a bit complicated to not completely exact to compare where Serbia is today in environmental protection or standards towards the EU. In the EU, we started to build wastewater treatment plants 50 years ago. For some reason, we can dig into the history, but it was not done at that time in Serbia. In Belgrade, didn't equip itself with a wastewater treatment plant after Second World War. Why was that? And when I discuss with colleagues here, they say, look, we have the Danube, and so be it. Let's pour things in the Danube, and who cares? Now that the new generations are shifting, they know that it's in mentalities. They know that it shouldn't be possible, legal, and it's not actually, to diverse wastewater in the Danube. So what has happened between the end of the 20th century and today, that we didn't have this as London, for instance. Look, why London equipped itself with sewage system? Because they were confronted to a pandemic, because they were confronted to a huge issue, and the London people are not pragmatic. They say, we have a problem, let's fix it, and they put everybody together around the table. They put the private sector, they put the entrepreneurs, they put the university, the politicians, the bank, the money, everything around the table, how to solve the sewage problem in London that was bringing cholera and other disease. And they started to solve the problem. That is the end of the 19th century. When you don't have the problem, like Belgrade didn't really feel the problem of sewage management until now, there was no problem to solve. Everything was going to the Danube. So problem solved, no problem. Now it's becoming a problem. So now is the time in history where Belgrade and Serbia in general start looking at, oh, we have water problem, we have sewage problem, we have air pollution problem because of our recent history. We have an energetic system that is designed in a way that is based on lignite, which doesn't bring much warmth given the quantity you burn, and a lot of pollution. If we had anthracite type of coal, it would be much more efficient, but we don't have in a country, or not enough. So the paradigm is to identify the problem and start working together on bringing the solutions. And I think you, Dušan, mentioned that is the role of the government. Of course, and Francoise said the government lead, but it's not alone. Municipalities, the international community, the civil society, and the media. Where is environment in the media? Where do we speak? Where do we debate about environmental solutions? And this is why such conference today is very important. I hope a lot of people are looking at it, because usually when we do a conference like this, we have thousands of people looking. But the amount of people that are not aware about environment because they just follow mainstream media, which doesn't reflect environment issues, is a bit of an issue, because then if they are not informed, how can they make informed choices? So I think there is a role of in the media to really understand that it's beyond politics, it's beyond rhetoric. It is our common good and our future. And if not ours, let's look at the future of children. Whose parents wants to give bad water to his kid? Whose parents want to have his children breathing bad air? I challenge you. If you find me one, I would like to discuss with that parent, because it's nobody would poison his children, But people do not know how to deal with the pollution. It's beyond them. It's if you live in Bor, in Smederevo, it looks like it's beyond your ability as a citizen to act. So this is why, of course, environmental institutions, government, municipalities are important. I would say, like Francoise, that we necessarily do not need a specific institution in charge of sustainable development. I mean, whatever the institutional setup, I would say it has to work. So whether you have a specific ministry looking only at this, or you have a clear understanding of the environmental issues and how to solve them across the ministry with a clear leadership, where to go, what we want to do, that's fine with me. There's no there is as much as possibilities, but it has to work. It has to work, meaning that the cost of non-action on environmental issues must be understood. It costs us more to do nothing than starting to do nothing. To do something, sorry. Usually we hear environmental chapter 27 is very expensive, there's a lot of costs, we cannot afford, EU should pay, others should pay, how we're going to do, it's too much. Well, again, we can circulate the reports of how much is expensive the cost of non-action. Think about the air pollution, the cost on health. Think about the cost of people not working because they're sick, and so on. So a healthy population is of course, I mean, it's crazy to say it, but a healthy population, it's better for everyone. Then the other thing is that, of course, planning the energy transition and not looking only at the quick fixes for this government is what we will advise and what we have already advised for the last years. However, there are fixes to be done in the coming months for this government, especially on air pollution. They can start, or energy transition, they can start really looking at what are the main causes of the problems and devising plans for solving these issues, because things take time. If we want to change the stoves in the households, if we want to decrease pollution from individual or collective heating facilities, we need to study, we need to order the parts, we need to have a financing scheme. This takes time. It's not easy to be done, but it takes time. It was done in Poland. Bulgaria started it. Look at what Sarajevo is doing. Sarajevo just launched a few days ago an inventory of pollution emission points in Sarajevo. You know that Sarajevo is competing with Belgrade for the first place of the worst polluted place in the Balkans, and sometimes they win, but sometimes Belgrade is before. So this inventory is needed. And this is something we can do in Zemun, in New Belgrade, in Vračar, in Dorčol. This is something we should be doing in Bor and Smederevo, although it's quite obvious, and in other places, to know where are the issues. And this is what also Francoise said, is let the data speak, let science speak, let's have let's say a scientific approach to the problem. Let's see where are the issues, and know how to solve them. Technically, we know more or less. We know we have the technology, but it needs money, but it needs organization and willingness. And we're coming back to the idea that without awareness, without the demand from the society, I'm afraid if we don't have that demand, the policy makers and the decision makers will do business as usual. However, the last weeks, I have seen excellent sign. You have all seen excellent signs from the new government, let's say, to engage into energy transition. There's much more clear wording on engaging, not now, but soon, to move away from coal, but keeping the energy security of the country. There is a good, let's say, ambition, and we want to accompany this. We have the green agenda in EU. We have the Green Deal in EU, and its implication for the Balkans, the green agenda for Western Balkans. But they are the same. They are based on the same principles, and we want to see how we can implement this idea. And again, it's not a revolution. It's the basic policies of sustainable development. It's looking at healthy people. It's looking at healthy economy, and how this can work together. Thanks.
Thank you, Antoine. This brings me to another question for Francoise, which somehow related to what you said. That of course we know that governments are not the only stakeholder. There are many of them, but there are of course few major ones. I mean, first of all, it's industry, it's economy. Then of course you have the public or CSOs or NGOs, academia. And we are now before a major step ahead by making a technological transfer because we are, so they call it, in the fourth industrial revolution, which means that we need to go and to cope with the new technological challenges. Would this technological transfer to new business and social model, particularly in economy, and to coping with the challenges to reach those goals from sustainable agenda, be somehow supported with the young generation. I mean, there is a special focus on youngsters, which are now somehow mostly affected either by COVID, the economic crisis, and everything else, with education and their future, in fact, how they can be mobilized, or can they be a leader, in fact, to all of those changes?
Great, thanks, Dušan. This is one of my favorite questions. But listen, before I talk about the youth, I want to talk about the private sector. So I think we agree that sustainability is the matter, is a whole of society effort, right? Now, while the government defines the vision and leads the transformation, the private sector has a critical role to play, and we'll see how the youth get involved in that. But the private sector holds the largest share of financing. It leads on innovation. It creates jobs. It has the capacity to design and implement new economic model, much beyond, the government strategic aspirations or the academic trial. So the private sector has the capacity to do a lot of damage on the environment and on society, but mostly it has the capacity to do a lot of good. So I think for us in the UN, we've been working with the private sector for a while, but we've really realized over the past 5 years that we must engage a lot more with the private sector. You're probably aware of the Global Compact, which is this platform started 15 years ago by a few trailblazing sort of very big companies. And the idea of the Global Compact was to promote sustainable best practice, best corporate business practices. And the Global Compact actually has a platform here in Serbia with about 40 companies. So the private sector, be it small or big companies, bank, insurance, manufacturing, service, investment funds, they're becoming a major ingredient to really shift the development and growth model towards a greener world. And of course, it's mostly because they can shift their production models. And that's where we move into the circular economy. So we hear a lot about the circular economy, and there are some countries like in the Nordic European countries where it's really picking up. In Serbia, it's really only starting, and there will be a lot to do there. But just to go back on the innovation part, and circular economy will be based on innovation. But the type of thing that we do, for example, as the UN, is challenges. We launch challenges with SMEs, with small and medium-sized enterprise, like a recent one which was launched by UNDP, WHO, and UNICEF about how to address air pollution. So, of course, there is the big initiative that the government must lead on energy transition. But in the meantime, what can we do in the communities and with the small enterprise that are all over Serbia? What can we do? So the UN sponsor this kind of thinking process, of development process within the communities, and the private sector is picking up and coming up with some fantastic ideas around, individual heating system, different air monitoring mechanisms, and also how do we work with children around the topic of air pollution. So, and this is where I want to briefly mention the youth. There is when I look at the opportunities on work, on new skills, on using new technologies, on setting up new businesses, who is going to do that? Of course, there's going to be a few of the current entrepreneurs, but those who can do that are the youth. These are the people who are currently, in their late teens and in their mid-20s. They are entering university, or they are finishing university, or they have 2-3 years of some form of job experience. And they are the ones who can embrace this reality, and think of new solutions for their own future. I think it's really important. So we've seen the youth demonstrating in the streets of Europe over the past couple of years. So we've seen that energy and that awareness that's growing among the young people. And in our survey, we saw that 90% or 93% of young people are really aware that climate change is a threat for the future and that they should do something about it. So these are the people, this is the generation that really can move forward with a lot of new solutions, formulating new solutions. But of course, not everything relies on them. And going back to the private sector, I want to mention something else, which I think is really coming also to the surface. I want to mention the role of the banking system and the insurance system. So insurance companies have considered the climate change much more seriously than any other private sector, because they have to insure these future risks, and they're very aware that these future risks are very real. But the banking system, and whether it's institutional banking like the European Investment Bank, the EBRD, or the commercial banking, now we have to work together to make sure that the financing that's provided at any type of level, large financing to the state, or very small financing to SMEs, that financing needs to be shaped around sustainability principle. And I want to, and this is where again the question of awareness and understanding is very important. And I will give you a very personal example. A few weeks ago, I was talking to my banker in France because she wants me to invest. And she knows I will invest only in good companies and in sort of the sustainable economy. And when I had this chat, when I started to have this chat with her several years ago, she kept telling me, okay, so you have 20% of your investment like this. And I said, no, I don't want 20%. I want 100%. And then she was like, but we can't do that because you would not make money. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, she told me she was talking about some investment in companies that are making an effort on their carbon emission. So good behavior companies. And I was asking her lots of questions that she couldn't answer. And she told me, Francoise, in Nice, so in the south of France, in this big city, I have less than one handful of people who are asking me for this type of investment. So, I thought this was puzzling because still today, the awareness and so again, that push and pull sort of dynamic is not yet mainstream, is far from being mainstream. So we need to talk a lot more about it. And going back to the youth, I'm telling the academic people in universities, the teachers, the professors in finance, in whatever, economic development, they need to really shape their own teaching agenda around sustainability. And it's happening, of course, in universities, but maybe it should happen even more so that all the youth understand that the future is in their hand. And it needs to be a greener future, a kinder future, and where profit is not the only obsession, but the well-being of humanity and of the planet becomes the obsession. So one more or a couple more points I would like to make. For us, the youth is a very important, of course, constituency. The Secretary General of the United Nations has set up an advisory panel with youth, with a few young people, 7 of them that represent different continents. And their mission is to look at how to address, of course, the recovery in the post-COVID, how to tackle climate change, and how to address the rising inequalities. So it is also the ambition of the United Nations over the next few years, and we have this next planning cycle that is starting in January. It's our ambition to do a lot more work with young people around Serbia and around the region, of course. and to get them more involved, not just in dialogue, but also in real action. And to be honest, if I was a young person, I would think I would not feel gloomy and I would not think that it's doomsday is coming. I would think that there is really great opportunities. I would think that the future is rather exciting because we have to reinvent it. We have really an open ground to build forward better, as Antoine said. And this is really one of the messages I want to pass to the younger generation.
Well, Francoise, thank you for this enthusiasm you just spilled out from your speech, also your presentation. But then there is another thing which is also very important. It is clear that there is no changes unless all the stakeholders have a certain interest in it, not necessarily profit, but the interest could be or the welfare or some benefits of the other kind. Still, major of those changes are in fact on industries, on private sector somehow, and they need to bring out all of those because after all they are producing a profit out of which we finance all of these changes in some sense. Would then, you mentioned the circular economy, it's a good example and good way out probably, change this or help changing or transfer of technologies. Antoine, you know that in Serbia, I mean, there's a plenty of those problems, particularly in waste management. We produce about 12 million tons of waste annually, of which of 100,000 tons of hazardous waste. There are only 10 handful of sanitary landfills, and they're just a fragment of 450,000 tons is deposited on sanitary landfills. All of the rest is just somewhere on dumps and somewhere else. Only 5%, up to 4 to 5% of all the waste is recycled. So there is a huge opportunity which is not used. And the circular economy is basically a model that aims at the paramount optimization of the production processes, meaning using all of the resources we have, like waste is a resource, or the renewable energies which we can put back. We then also can make the optimization in a work, labor, or on time, and everything else. And how can Serbia use the benefit of this new business or social model to advance somehow? What is needed to be done in order to secure transfer of technologies? Because technology may be used as an advance and providing the better competitiveness of companies. Is it possible in Serbia? What do you think? Can we use the principle of local solutions, like Francoise said, in order to build up a general platform? What are the European experiences, and can we create conditions for secure and sustainable economy somehow?
Yes, it's a very interesting question, and I think Serbia is already doing it. You know, Serbia is already involved in a circular economy. You have businesses in Serbia that are applying these principles, not for the sake of applying those principles, not because they come from a circular economy plan from the EU or wherever, because it makes sense business-wise. There is a biomass plants. There are small companies that are recycling, and they make money out of it, and that's a business model that is sustainable. And the companies they realize this very, very fast. Some of them. An example: there is a company that produces wood pellets, and I think UNDP has been supporting them earlier on last year, and they find out that using the residues of their own product could generate heat for their facility. So they're closing the loop, and that's the objective of circular economy. They can produce, they can keep their business model, their production, but they can reduce their costs. And a businessman would look at this favorably: less cost, better production. You can even do it for the sake of environment, but you can also do it for the sake of business and making money, making good money. There are a lot of examples like this in Serbia. The question is why it's not taking off faster, or why in France, as Francoise said, not enough people talk about green bonds or investing into green companies. Why it's a slow start? There are many things to unlock in France, in Serbia, elsewhere. Many things, mentalities that it's not possible. The banks that are thinking that people want to make a 10% return instead of 5%, because it's a quick gain. But we're coming there. I think if the EU is able to put such a document like the Green Deal, it means that there's a shift in mentality. You know, the EU is not an environmental organization. It's at its core, it took environment as something horizontal to be done, but it started really to gain traction when the citizens demand for it, and as Francoise said, when the youth were in the streets in the Friday for a Future, when their generation of also officials and people working in administrations and in institutions are there as more and more and start to make change and influence the decisions. So we can change because we have now, with the Green Deal and the Green Agenda, we have a great policy framework. It has to come with unlocking the potentials, and we discuss about media, about citizens, about the youth, and I fully agree with Francoise. We need to have in the curricula at schools and university hours of education sessions where we discuss about the state of economy, how we can improve it, how we can repair a fridge instead of buying maybe a new one, where we can plant tomatoes instead of going to buy tomatoes under plastic cover in the shop. We need to shift a little bit the way we think, that we are not consumers, we are active prosumers, and we know what we're buying and we know what we're doing. And this is a shift in a mentality. I mean, it's not, you don't need to be Einstein to understand that the planet has limited resources and we cannot expand it indefinitely. And it's not a question of being from the right or from the left or from the Green Party. It's just a question of survival for our species and the other species on this planet. How we will do this? There are many tools. Again, the Green Deal and the Green Agenda is a tool. SDGs are a great tool for looking at and a vision for looking at how to ensure sustainable development, and also many actions on the ground. And this is, I think, fundamental, and maybe the difference somehow in history between what you could see now in England, in France, compared to what you can see in the Western Balkans, is the amount of activities of people involved into agroforestry, into recycling activities, into co-sharing cars, into looking at how to gather children from a school to go to a extra school activity. You don't necessarily need 10 parents driving 10 cars to bring 10 kids from the school to the football club. You can maybe think about a small electric bus that would bring these kids from school to the football club. This is not organized by the state. This is organized by the school, by parents, or by the football club, you know. But this is when people start to think that it's not too difficult to be done, and then they can do it with small things. You can see in the US, people are gardening, tomatoes and other things on the roof of their building, and many of these actions are just possible. What is missing in Serbia and the Western Balkans in general is, you know, you have to fight this inertia that things are not possible because it's too complicated, because we have no time. But this inertia also comes because the life is not easy. You know, there are economic constraints. There are issues in also in the way you access banking facilities, in the way you can discuss with your municipality, the way you can have you can get access to authorization and things like this. An open and more transparent and less corrupted city, country brings more initiatives. What we're trying to do, and for example, Francoise talked about this call against air pollution. This is excellent because it tries to break the ice and bringing people with good ideas to do something, and with relatively small amount of money compared to big infrastructure project, you can start seeding, changing the mentalities in doing things a bit different. There is, and of course, there are large environmental infrastructures investment that has to be done, and the EU and other banks and the development partners, the World Bank, the EIB, BRD would continue to help. But it also means that the government is thinking how to open the fiscal space, how to make sure that people pay what the polluters, they apply the polluters pay principle. The companies that are must be responsible. If they are not responsible, they must be in inspection and they must pay the price of pollution. And this is not imposed by the EU. This is just common sense. This is not an EU requirement. It is just Serbian people want companies to be respectful to the own water and air that we have in Serbia. You know, I used to see people throwing cans over the window or trash over the window when they drive. One day we stopped, we took the trash and we brought it back to these people, and we told them, I think you throw this by the window, it's yours. And the lady was like offended, you know, taking it personally, thinking that we had something against them, and say, look, this is our country. It was in another country. This is our country. It's your country. Why would you do this? Why would you trash your own house? Do you do this at home? Take it with you. Don't trash your own house. And of course, you can see this. You can see this every day in the Sava, and the people don't really respect. But I'm confident. I see more and more NGOs, and I see on social media the youth is more and more concerned, and they're taking action. But it's hard. It's hard. Sometimes they're scared. Sometimes they're not really seen as doing the right thing. It can be politicized, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. We should, as adults, make sure that the youth is able to live in a more open and world and more transparent, and that we unlock these potentials, whether it's for climate action, for circular economy, and also working with the businesses. I'm sorry, I'm a bit like shooting everywhere, but it's to make it's to really focus on the idea that it's many things to be done at the same time. But for this, we have umbrella policies, but it's the action, everyday action of citizens that can change, provided that they understand and they are aware and informed of the issues.
Thank you for this. I mean, yes, I mean, we did have really interesting discussion, but unfortunately our time is out. Although we covered most of the questions or topics I really wanted to have. But let me just give a brief conclusion, just wrapping up this session and giving some kind of message from this. I would like to say that the green recovery we've been talking about could be, I mean, the circular economy could be used as a tool for green recovery as a systematic approach or a framework for resolving the questions from environment, because as we know, industries are taking a certain part of it, but then again, not alone. It's together with the government, which are basically setting up the rules and controlling the implementation. Then also we have the society as a wide as a support, but then also as a controlling element as well, but as contributing in a creative way how to do this. And then also the innovations are something which are needed, but in a pragmatic way, to use it for gaining those goals. We can use this Green Deal as a kind of a local plan but more, not like a Green Deal for Serbia. I would like more to stress that we need a green plan for Serbia, how to implement those ideas from the Green Deal. Where we need a huge contribution in education, in fact, in setting up the system, but Francoise highlighted, the system must be set up like developing the institutions, the legislation, the mechanism, how we can provide and control the implementation of these rules. And also we have to find a sustainable way how to finance it, because sooner or later it comes to money, one way or another. So we need resources to put forward these ideas. And before all, we need a political will, understanding, and wish to do these changes for the benefit for all of us. With this, I would like to conclude this session and to thank you very much indeed. I hope that this message will pass to all those that need to listen to this. And of course, I hope that we'll have another opportunity to talk again. Thank you once again very much.
Thank you so much, Dušan. Nice to be there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.